So today, we're diving into a really fascinating ancient Buddhist text called the Sutra on Wrong Views. And what's so cool about it is that this old story has this incredibly modern lesson. It suggests that sometimes the greatest wisdom isn't about having all the answers, but about knowing which questions just aren't worth asking in the first place.
So let's just jump right into the big mystery here. Imagine you can meet a spiritual master, someone who's supposed to be fully enlightened, and you ask them the biggest, most profound questions about life, the universe, everything, and they just refuse to answer. Why would they do that? That's the puzzle we're going to try and solve today.
All right, so let's set the scene. We're in a place called the Kalandaka Bamboo Grove, in a city called Rajagaha, and this is all happening shortly after the Buddha himself has passed away, achieved what's called final nirvana. So you can imagine the mood. There's a lot of reverence for sure, but also a bit of uncertainty about his legacy.
And this is where our two main characters step onto the stage. The whole story is really driven by the tension between them. On one side, you've got Venerable Ānanda. He was the Buddha's right-hand man, famous for having this perfect memory of every single teaching. And on the other side, we have an ascetic, an old acquaintance who comes from a totally different school of thought. And let's just say he's not there for a friendly chat. He's come with a major challenge.
So this ascetic, he doesn't beat around the bush at all. He walks right up to Ānanda and he gets straight to the point. See, he thinks he's found a huge hole in the Buddha's teachings and he's pretty eager to poke at it.
And here they are, the famous unanswered questions. I mean, just look at them. Is the universe eternal? Is it infinite? Is your soul just your body or is it something separate? And the big one, what happens to a fully enlightened person after they die? Back then, these were the hottest topics in philosophy. And the Buddha? He refused to take a side on any of them. And to this ascetic, that silence doesn't sound like wisdom. It sounds like a major weakness.
He basically lays it all out on the table. He says, your teacher, Gautama, he never gave a straight answer on these things. So, was it because he didn't know? The accusation here is pretty sharp. Maybe the Buddha's silence wasn't profound wisdom. Maybe it was just plain old ignorance.
Okay, but here's the thing. This is where the whole story just completely turns on its head. Ānanda doesn't get defensive, he doesn't get angry. Instead, he just calmly explains his master's silence, and he argues that it wasn't a lack of knowledge at all, but actually a profound expression of it.
Ānanda's response is so simple, but so powerful. He just says, the Blessed One does know. He insists the Buddha had total wisdom and insight into all of these questions. And right there, that changes everything. The silence wasn't a failure. It was a deliberate choice, and it came from a much deeper place of understanding.
Then Ānanda introduces this key idea of wrong views. You see, the Buddha looked at these big speculative questions, and he didn't see a path to truth. He saw a trap. It's like a tangled thicket of thorny bushes. Getting stuck in a debate about whether the universe is eternal doesn't actually help you become a happier, more peaceful person. It just gets you more and more tangled up in arguments, leading you away from the real goal, which is freedom from suffering.
So, what was the Buddha's big secret then? Well, it wasn't about winning a debate or picking the right side. It was about getting to a viewpoint so high up that you could see the entire debate for what it really was. Just a system, with its own starting points, its own logic, and, ultimately, its own dead ends.
So Ānanda breaks it down into these 4 steps. First, the Buddha sees the philosophical view for what it is. Second, he understands its origin, like how and why a person comes to believe that. Third, he sees where that view ultimately leads, which is often to more attachment and more suffering. And finally, by seeing that whole process, from beginning to end, he's no longer trapped by it. He's outside of the debate, looking in. He's free.
You can just imagine the ascetic's reaction, right? This explanation just completely blows his mind. He came expecting a philosophical argument, a simple yes or no. But what he got instead was a totally new way of thinking about what wisdom even is.
And just like that, the ascetic is completely won over. All that intellectual skepticism just melts away. He says, "It is wonderful, Master Ānanda." And in that moment of clarity, he decides he wants to become Ānanda's student right then and there. But check out Ānanda's response. It's an absolute masterclass in humility. He immediately waves off the praise and says, "Don't go to me for refuge. Go for refuge to the same Blessed One that I follow." He points the guy right back to the original source, back to the Buddha.
And just like that, our story comes full circle. The man who showed up to challenge the Buddha's entire legacy ends up starting a whole new life. He dedicates himself to the Buddha, the teachings, and the community, the very things he came to question, pledging to be a follower from that day on.
So what's the big takeaway here? I think it's that the deepest wisdom isn't always about having the right answer. Sometimes it's about understanding that certain questions are designed to be traps, not pathways. It's about understanding why we're asking in the first place.
So I'll just leave you with this final thought. We live in a world that's pretty obsessed with getting the right answers to everything. But this ancient story asks us to think about something different. What if the real freedom, the real answer, isn't about solving the puzzle, but about realizing it was never a puzzle we needed to solve at all? Thanks for joining us.